Now we have item 5.1 is the Committee of Adjustment minor variance application that I read off earlier, HMA 16110, HMA 16111, 192 Houston Street North, and 181 John Street North. I have written comments that we've received from Mark Noskowitz of Goodman's LLP and the Beasley Neighborhood Association. We now have this before us. May I first have a motion to receive the added written submissions? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Connolly. All in favour? And I have two delegations that wish to come down to speak, so I'm going to ask former Councillor Brad Clark, Maple Leaf Strategies, wish to come down.
He said, Mr. Clark. I'm not that old. Good.
No, but it doesn't have a red light.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Good morning, Madam Chair and councillors. I am the principal consultant for Toronto office of Maple Leaf Strategies. It's a national public affairs research and government relations firm. A little over 30 days ago, the Beasley Neighborhood Association retained me to research the two minor variance applications. Any applicable municipal and provincial policies, provide advice and facilitate negotiations with Greenwin Inc. I was also advised by the BNA that failing that successful outcome, that they were prepared and willing to attend the Ontario Municipal Board. During our first meeting with the proponent, both parties agreed to park any issue that was not a legitimate planning issue and subject to the hearing at the Ontario Municipal Board. The decision enabled both parties to really concentrate on the key planning issues in dispute. After negotiating a mutually agreeable position, we met with the city's planning and legal staff, as well as Councillor Farr and Mayor Eisenberger, to explain the proposed settlement. Today, we are asking the Planning Committee to approve, to support the negotiated agreement, and direct staff to present the proposed settlement at the Ontario Municipal Board. The settlement specifies the number of 3-bedroom units will be set at 35. That is an increase of 25 from the original minor variance applications. The number of 2-bedroom units will not be less than 25% of the total of all units with the subject properties. We are pleased to publicly report that Greenwin Inc. has agreed that no existing tenants would be displaced as a result of this redevelopment. On this point, I do wish to extend my personal thanks to Mr. Green and Ms. Boyce. Further, the Beasley Neighborhood Association and I have agreed to hold meetings with the tenants to ensure that they understand the outcome of this agreement, their rights and their obligations. Madam Chair, I wish to reference the last paragraph of the jointly signed letter on the BNA letterhead, which you received already. Both parties are respectfully asking the City of Hamilton to conduct a feasibility study for a Made in Hamilton family-friendly housing policy that would explore means of incorporating consideration for families in future development proposals for rental units, condominiums, and affordable housing. Both parties would be pleased to participate in the consultation and the development of such a policy and look forward to Councillor Farr's motion being presented. Madam Chair, that's the conclusion of my report, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions of the presenter? Councillor Farr.
Always on time. Still well priced down, well put, much appreciated. I just wanted to give you an opportunity, former Councillor Clark, former Cabinet Minister Clark, through you, Chair, to maybe just expand on the mood of the negotiations.
They were friendly. The negotiations were respectful. We had I guess 3 meetings in total, and then the final one with our staff, with the city staff. It was approximately 6, maybe 7 hours of discussions. There was a myriad of issues that we had to deal with at the very beginning in the first meeting, and a number of them were simply pushed to the side because they were not planning issues that we would be able to argue before the Ontario Municipal Board. Once we were able to do that, we could actually concentrate on my client's concerns about a family-friendly policy, about making this building family-friendly for the community. And the company, Greenwin, really did understand the concerns. I can tell you that we had a great deal of discussion about the fact that there was no policy in Hamilton. So in essence, we were discussing and making decisions on this subject property that other developers wouldn't necessarily be doing. And hence, that's why the request for a family-friendly policy study was proposed.
Almost through you, Chair, a site-specific example of what we can achieve citywide. Through you, Chair, would you agree?
That would be, Madam Chair, a very good way of putting it. It is a reasonable, pragmatic solution to the redevelopment of these apartment buildings. The two subject properties were very much in need of this. And the agreement that was garnered from Greenwin not to displace any of the remaining tenants while this redevelopment was occurring, I think was very magnanimous on the part of the proponent. Certainly not necessary, certainly not a planning issue, but in the interest of community relations, they felt that it was something they wanted to do.
Just prior to the, thanks, Brad, the meeting today, we have collectively met. It was, I assume, and expect the last meeting that I will be party to with specific to this issue over probably 2-3 years now. You know, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, as I mentioned a little earlier, or a little later last week when we all got together in room 222 in advance of this meeting, as I say, and it couldn't have landed more smoothly. And you know, hats off and credit to the BNA who brought a well-versed, polished facilitator who has a great deal of knowledge in terms of governance and policy, obviously, for anybody who sat on planning committee in the past, and who went toe-to-toe in an amicable way for about 8 hours total with another old friend of council and former Mayor Larry Deaney, who was representing the other side. So I'm quite pleased to see just how this has finally come to an amicable conclusion, hopefully with support of the motion that I'll bring forward at the appropriate time. We can avoid the OMB altogether, and that was the whole point from the beginning. Thank you, Brad, and much appreciated. I look forward to moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and certainly thank you for recognizing former Mayor Larry Deaney. I was going to do that next. Appreciate he's also here in the audience on this item. Councillor Green, you're next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just through you to the presenter, acknowledging the complexity of this kind of trend, the shifting trend of capital projects being at end of life cycle, needing renewal, understanding displacement and the effects of gentrification, the crisis of low income, deep affordable housing. What did you take away from this in terms of like best practices, learnings, being able to navigate communities through this process?
The negotiations between the proponent and the Beasley Neighborhood Association, I really did find that it went very well. It was a bit of a learning process for the Beasley Neighborhood Association in terms of that type of mediation. I found that the proponent really was sincere about redeveloping the building in an appropriate way, making it healthy, clean, safe for the tenants, working with the tenants, developing community relations programs. The item, Councillor, that I found was lacking with some policies that the city could put in place. We did spend a little bit of time talking about the family-friendly policies, family-friendly housing policies that are in place in New Westminster, Vancouver, and Toronto. We really do believe, and I have spoken with Mr. Robichaud about it, that a made-in-Hamilton family-friendly housing policy is prudent and would also help with the discussions that this committee and council will be having with regards to inclusionary zoning. So I think this dialogue that occurred between the BNA perhaps is exemplary for other neighborhood associations when they're dealing with planning processes. It is far better to sit down and find common ground than it is to simply oppose on ideals.
And certainly respecting the fact that you were here representing the Beasley Neighborhood Association, I can understand why that framework or why that would be present for you. I actually take a different view. I think that if anything, this is a learning for the developer, that in taking on these types of redevelopment and renewal projects, they're not just beholden to the financial stakeholder, that now in this new framework, they have social stakeholders in every neighborhoods that they go to. And I know that Councillor Farr has been working on this for quite some time, and certainly look forward to hearing his motion and certainly appreciate you being able to help them navigate. I'll say on the record, Madam Chair, the Beasley neighborhood is a very sophisticated, nuanced, intersectional, from my opinion, neighborhood association who takes into considerations all of the people, residents that are in their communities, whether they're at the table or not, and it's rare to see that. It's rare to see that. It's often the case, Madam Chair, that neighborhood associations are framed in the backdrop of a ratepayers or a homeowners association. So to see this is exciting. And I think, again, messages to hopefully potential future policies around development that particularly with the OMB in uncertainty, that increasingly developers are going to be forced to recognize the social shareholders of their communities. So I just want to thank you for being here today. I will say that I was shocked that you were doing this inner-city work. It's great to see, and certainly hope you stay on this side of the fence, because I never like seeing you on the other side of the fence. So having said all of that, I appreciate you being here, and look forward to the outcomes. Bye for now.
Madam Chair, if I just may, thank you, Councillor. I sincerely appreciate your kind remarks. With regards to the negotiations that occurred and the maturity of the BNA, you're absolutely correct. It is a mature organization. They acknowledged and recognized early on that the proponent has a right to develop their property within the guidelines of the municipality. And they also acknowledged that the value question, the economic question, is very important to the proponent. So the negotiations that we had to, in fact, recognize both the social improvements, but also that the company needed to make a reasonable amount of money to keep the project moving forward. So I think it was very well. In terms of changes that are coming, 100%. Councillor, with changes to the OMB, this type of discussion, these types of negotiations would be needed to move developments forward. And it would be better to do them early in the process as opposed to just holding a planning meeting and trying to ram it through. Thank you for your comments.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. With that, I have a motion to receive the delegation from Mr. Clark, moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Green. All in favour? Thank you. And I have Rob Fiedler of the Beasley Neighbourhood Association to come forward. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair and Councillors, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. Brad Clark, who we retained about a month ago to assist us in the matter before you, has outlined for you the settlement reached between the Beasley Neighbourhood Association and Greenwin with regard to the latter's plans for 181 John and 192 Houston. So I'd like to keep my comments brief and not repeat what has already been said about the particulars of the settlement, other than to convey that the Beasley Neighbourhood Association is pleased to have arrived at a mutually agreed upon solution that meets the needs of both parties and includes a commitment not to displace remaining tenants. I want to emphasize on behalf of the Beasley Neighborhood Association that I hope today we turn the page and start a new day, especially between ourselves and Greenwin. To reach a settlement, we traveled a long ways in a short time and surprised even ourselves. It takes two to tango, so I'd like to acknowledge and thank the people from Greenwin for listening to our concerns and taking them seriously. A compromise means talking about wants and needs and figuring out how to arrive at a solution both parties can live with. Recently, in an email exchange over social media, a community member noted it is important to her to ensure that as our area changes, as it undergoes revitalization, it is important for those of us who are relatively comfortable and well-housed to put our efforts toward protecting those who are more vulnerable in our community. And to stabilize their circumstances, including the ability for them to access or maintain suitable and affordable housing. People who have followed or are aware of this file know that beyond the particulars, we're in the midst of a housing crisis for some. We're also in the midst of remaking our downtown and many inner-city neighborhoods. We're seeing investment and uplift after a period of relative decline. It is important that we not ignore the hard edge of this for some. Revitalization doesn't need to mean displacement, and there are opportunities for us now in the present to ensure that positive changes underway are broadly and equitably enjoyed. From the Beasley Neighborhood Association's perspective, this is an important goal and something that in a myriad of ways we seek to achieve. It is something we look to you as councillors to partner with us in. So we ask you to support this settlement and to consider at a future meeting the Beasley Neighborhood Association and Greenwin's joint request for the city to conduct a feasibility study for a family-friendly housing policy to explore how to incorporate consideration for families and larger households in future development proposals for rental units, condominiums, and affordable housing. Councillor Farr, our Ward 2 councillor, has indicated he plans to give notice of his intention to move a motion requesting such a feasibility study be conducted at a future Planning Committee meeting. We wish to thank Councillor Farr for his support and efforts. I don't need to go into detail, but he has taken a long interest and has been active on this file and the issues that it entails. I'd also like to thank Brad Clark. His role in this is quite integral in helping us come to a settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that, the comments. And with that, Councillor Farr.
Through you, Chair. Rob, you are educated in the field of planning. Share with us your recent achievements.
Can you be more specific?
Just how educated are you?
Oh. Are you trying to make me bashful?
No, brag just a little.
So a few months ago, I successfully defended a PhD dissertation on post-war suburbanization.
So we're not dealing with a chump here. Through you, Chair, we're dealing with Fielder, who has been, yeah, no, that's
as opposed to?
No reference to the previous speaker. Chair, Rob, we've had many dealings in the past. I should note, too, that Rob is a resident of the North End Neighborhood Association. The co-chair is up there, Mike Borelli of the Beasley Neighborhood Association, also a resident of the North End Neighborhood Association. And that doesn't take away with the fact that generally on the Wednesday nights when council happens, around that table are a boatload of Beasley neighborhood residents, a very inclusive group. I'm always impressed, have been from day one, from the very first Beasley neighborhood meeting I ever went to. When we were talking about building a charter, that charter was built. It was the first of its kind in Canada, and it's fairly recently been reestablished in that community, and it speaks to all the great things that we're seeing, and it's truly the inspiration behind a lot of the great community work that we see in that neighborhood from the residents and from the nearby residents and former residents like Charlie and Mike and others that dedicate so much time and energy. And when they do on issues like this, it's clear to me that there's policies, there's programs, there's initiatives that will benefit more than just that one neighborhood. It's truly remarkable, and it's been fun to be part of it, working with people like Rob. And with that, through you, Rob, it was probably 4 months ago that you were part of, we meet quarterly. We try to meet 4 times a year, myself, my office, with the all the reps from the neighborhood associations. And there was a motion passed giving me pretty much my marching orders to look at this. This was about 4 months ago. Since you and I have somewhat worked together, we have maybe we're at a draft point, but can you talk about what it is that was stated in that room some 4 months ago over here in 264 with respect to what's before us here today, through you, Chair?
Okay, so before this particular Ward 2 Community Council meeting, starting last November roughly, running through to June, I was the parent rep for the Bonetto School on the District School Board's accommodation review, looking at 9 schools in the West Hamilton City area. And so through that, we became aware of not just uneven utilization across our area of study, but that the North End, Beasley, and to a lesser extent, Corktown, Stinson had under-enrollment in their local schools, and that the trend lines going forward didn't seem to be improving despite all of the discussions about intensification. And so we were interested in ensuring that as we see development, that we get some family units to ensure that our facilities are well used, which conforms to places to grow in the provincial policy statement's objectives. And so we started talking as a group about how we might do that, and through that we started looking at policies from other places that have sought to do this. I don't know that we're at the point of a draft policy. I think we have done background research to look at how we might do that, which is why it would be important to do a feasibility study.
It was clear from that first meeting where we brought it up, and thanks for the brief history lesson, that it's a unified effort from all 6 neighborhood associations. There's 6 neighborhoods and 6 neighborhood associations in Ward 2, as I've mentioned in the past many times. And the marching orders were clear as well. And so you also, through you, Chair, took a trip. I mean, former Councillor Clark, former Minister Clark referenced Westminster, Vancouver, and Toronto. You were out west this summer, and we have communicated on it actually probably to a very brief extent so far, but we will continue to communicate on what they're doing there. In a nutshell, through you, Chair, what is it you found there, and how can that maybe be beneficial should today's notice of motion be passed as a motion in 2 weeks' time?
Okay, so first I'll say that I'm a Hamiltonian by choice, not by birth. So I was out on the West Coast visiting my extended family, which still live there. I grew up in Surrey, but I have a lot of relatives in the Burnaby, New Westminster area. And so while I was there, I arranged to speak to the mayor and acting chief planner of the city of New Westminster, as well as someone in the planning department in the city of North Vancouver, both places that have policies. What I heard from them was a sort of a history of how they got to where they were. So it took a number of steps to come to it, but it was really precipitated by the arrival of applications with very few larger units. So I think that the mayor referenced his council sort of being shocked at a proposal that had mostly studio apartments and 1-bedrooms. And so they were concerned that they're in a somewhat different situation than us. They're a smaller, like geographically smaller, older city that has to grow up and has been growing up for about 20 years since the arrival of their SkyTrain. And so the mayor himself moved from a house to a 4-bedroom apartment a number of years ago. And so he was describing in his comments to me what is needed to make this work. Why would someone want to live in high-density surroundings, and what makes that a viable choice? And then the other side of it being, how do you actually get supply?
Excellent. We'll continue to maybe work on some draft. Again, this is the result of a collective wish from all 6 neighborhood associations. I've heard from well, 2, and I'm going to count BNA 3 in the last few days in anticipation of the delegation here today, and hopefully the resolve to an issue, Madam Chair, that began on a very cold February night in 2015. I don't know if I've been in a more, it's among the most contentious community meetings I've ever participated in. There was about 65 residents from both Houston and John. And again, to be here today, it's night and day, and it's thanks to people like Rob, Michael, and others with the BNA who worked very closely with some vulnerable residents that night and have got us to this point. So thank you very much for your delegation, Rob. I continue to look forward to working with you. It was a great conversation we had last night. I have to tell you, there was a little part of me that was paying attention to the Chiefs game as well, but I had the sound down. I can multitask, as I've told you in the past, so I move to receive the delegation.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Green, though, on the speaker's list. Okay, thank you. And with that, move to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Thank you, Rob, very, very much. And again, congratulations. I know how difficult that is. And coming back to Councillor Farr, your motion, sir?
I have 2. The other I'm going to leave as a notice. This one, though, speaks to what has been presented to us today by both delegates, and with respect to the issue regarding the Committee of Adjustment minor variance application. So item 5.1, HM/A-16 semicolon 110 and HM/A-16 semicolon 111, 192 Houston Street North, Hamilton, and 181 John Street North, Hamilton, supported by the Planning and Economic Development Department, but denied by the Committee of Adjustment, that the City Solicitor be directed to support the settlement as described in the letter dated September 28, 2017, from Goodman's, barristers, and solicitors regarding the appeals of minor variance applications HM/A-16, semicolon 110, and HM/A-16, -111, and very briefly, again, this concludes what started out to be a very contentious episode at the new Beasley Rec Center way back in February 2015. It was widely reported on at the time, and it brought to light, I think, for a lot of people, the issue that we heard about today, and hopefully we will address in the near future with the notice of motion that I intend to leave as a notice of motion, and specifically as it relates to larger size units or family size units. Rob Fielder, our last delegate, had mentioned his role, and he underplayed it, representing the school board parent group that this time around, when it came to AR accommodation review, I think they did a much better job, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, in engaging with parents of schools. We know that a priority now from that engagement sees a very unique community hub, unique to Hamilton and maybe unique to the province, being requested by the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. Specifically, it's a request for funding to make the McDonald precinct a reality, bring 2 schools, elementary schools, together there, and a multitude of partners who the board and our city staff, including at the table our city manager, myself, and others, are going to be part of that community hub. It was a tremendous effort, and it was led initially by the citizens, and so it was really great to see that effort come to fruition, to have that official request from the Hamilton District School Board. And ultimately it stemmed from a declining enrollment in the inner city, and a declining enrollment not just downtown, but Ward 1, Ward 3, and with the current provincial formula that really just looks at funding based on how many butts are in the seat, and not taking into account all those other eventualities in inner cities, you know, it was really a snowball out of control. And if we can, through our own City of Hamilton planning policy, tackle that issue of declining enrollment, we ought to. And what we have here today is 2 things. One, a community that banded together, that supported their fellow residents, some with challenges even asking them to hold out, asking them to not take offers to move, so they're larger bedroom apartments, which are obviously in the decline, and not clearly the kinds of units that developers today want to build in this and other cities, asking them to hold out, sharing with them that we're going to fight for you, and ultimately leading to a resolve here today that shows just that, with an extra 25 larger units, 3-bedroom units, and certainly I think 25% of all the units in Houston and John Street being 2 bedrooms. They've done just that. And in turn, and to conclude, they've also addressed the declining enrollment issue, because if we have more opportunities for families to live in these areas, we are tackling that issue directly and hopefully getting more and more families living in these great communities of increasing vitality, and bringing the classroom sizes up to the extent where we don't have to have these debates every 4 or 5 years in accommodation reviews. And in fact, I'd like to see our policies help the board decide on how many portables to build and not how many schools to close. Thank you, and thank you for the work of the community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm reminded of the video that's circulating around the internet about the introduction of wolves into ecosystems, where they are able to control the animal populations that eat the vegetation, which create erosion, which actually changes the river patterns. It's a very interesting video on ecosystems. And I think about policy and the decisions that we make around this table, not just on site-specific situations like this, and 181 John, which I remember attending the rally hosted by the Somali community at the time, I believe. And I think about the decisions that we make around this table that have these lasting impacts on our social ecosystem here in the city. And I think what I'm most excited about in Councillor Farr's leadership and work, and certainly led by the Beasley Neighborhood Association, is this citywide application of this policy eventually. I see, and I know Councillor Partridge, in the work that she's doing in Flamborough, talking about deep affordability, understanding the housing crisis, knowing that home ownership is increasingly out of the reach for not some, but many Canadians and Hamiltonians that are here. So again, I just want to take a moment and reflect on the fact that we as a corporation are guided by the mission to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully. And I think that in not putting into enforcement, into code, into bylaw, into planning, this idea of multi-unit family accommodations for rentals, we are going to find ourselves in a crisis that I'll be speaking about later on, of only growing proportions. And 10 cities and families being displaced is a very real thing for us. So I appreciate the work. I know that the conversation has come up time and time again as it related to the West Harbor. But you think of that ecosystem, and you think of the way that one policy will impact another, the idea of the closure of schools. I can tell you this, Madam Chair, that in my community, one of the hottest, fastest growing gentrified neighborhoods, and I don't say that necessarily in a great way in terms of who's being displaced, schools are always a consideration. And for a long time, the school board had put in abeyance any type of capital investment into Adelaide, Memorial. Kathy Weaver got rebuilt, but many of our schools have long since gone because of the policies that we had around this table on not enforcing or not applying deep affordability and family-size units into the neighborhood. So I say that to say thank you to those that are present, thank you to the proponents on both sides of the fence, Mr. Clark and Mr. Deaney, as their experience certainly guided a more amicable way, and hopefully will provide for a citywide application under Councillor Farr's leadership here around this table. So I'm excited about that, and I hope to see it applied right across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Farr, your motion's on the floor, moved by Councillor Green. Thank you. All in favor? And you're going to bring your notice of motion later on in the meeting? Sure. Thank you, sir. So with that, that passes. And
just, may I read it it's very short, and there's
Sure,
a
go
number of
ahead.
people from the
Let's do it
community
now.
here.
Please, that's why I'm asking. Is that okay, Ida?
Sure.
Yep, go ahead.
So I
Thank
would
you.
move, this is going to remain as a notice to allow some delegates to come before us in a couple of weeks.
Just before
to
you
plan the
start,
committee.
Councillor, Ida's handing it out for all of us.
Oh, great.
Okay?
Yeah, I had sent that to Ida a little earlier. I appreciate that. That the appropriate City of Hamilton staff be requested to conduct a feasibility study with appropriate public consultation for the development of a family-friendly housing policy that would explore means of incorporating consideration for families in the future development proposals of rental units, condominiums, and affordable housing. And that'll stay as a notice.
And that's staying as a notice of motion. Thank you very much, everyone. So everyone's had a chance to hear that. And we voted on the motion. I'll just say it again, all in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Just being sure for the record, because I've just been running around a bit. And certainly, I do want to commend Councillor Farr and everybody involved in resolving this, that it's not an OMB fight, because we know how much time and effort and costs are involved in that. So whenever we can avoid it, it's always wonderful.
I mean, it's the SPRC, the Hamilton Legal Clinic, Dave Brody, City Housing, myself. There was some other folks that were at that first meeting that was been referenced a couple of times this meeting. So hats off to all the partners that work with the Neighborhood Association, including a councillor and some city staff.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, everyone. So with that, we're going to go on to 9.2, which